Girl, pull up a seat. No, for real. Get comfortable because the tea I'm about to spill today is so hot it's going to scald your spirit. You know how they say the devil works hard, but a woman scorned works harder. Honey, the woman in this story didn't just work harder. She built a whole new corporation of karma and served as its CEO. This ain't your everyday baby mama drama or some trifling side chick foolishness. No, ma'am. This story is about money, murder, and a mother in law so evil she'd make the devil himself take notes. This is the story of my girl, Isabella. And it all came to a head on what should have been the saddest day of her life. The day they read her husband's will, the day she was supposed to officially become the grieving widow. And that child was the one and only role she had no intention of playing. She'd come to watch the final act of a tragedy she wrote herself. She was there to collect the debt for a so-called accident that was anything but. The man she'd mourned for a month, the love of her life, the center of her universe. He was gone. And she was about to make damn sure the people responsible for it followed him straight to hell. Let's start right there in that cold mahogany panel lawyer's office that smelled of old money and fresh betrayal. Isabella walked in looking like a dream wrapped in a nightmare. She was draped in a custom-made Tom Ford morning dress, black as a sin-eater's soul, tailored so perfectly it looked like it was poured onto her skin. On her feet, a pair of black Christian Louboutin pumps with a red sole so sharp it could slice a throat. Not a hair was out of place in her sleek, low chignon. Her face was a mask of serene sorrow, her eyes hidden behind a pair of oversized Chanel sunglasses. To the world, she was a portrait of tragic grace, but underneath that fabric, her heart was beating a war drum. They thought she'd been shattered into a million pieces. They weren't wrong, but they forgot that a shattered mirror reflects 1,000 daggers, and every single one of them was pointed directly at their trifling hearts. She'd been married to Michael for 5 glorious years. A whirlwind romance, a fairy tale wedding, a life that looked like it was ripped from the pages of a magazine. Michael Sterling. He had a name that sounded like old money, and he had the bank account to match. He was devastatingly handsome, with a smile that could coax angels into sin, and he was the heir to the Sterling pharmaceutical fortune. Now, let me paint you a picture of Isabella. To Michael's high society circle, she was an outsider, a beautiful, intelligent, and ambitious woman from a humble background, but an outsider nonetheless. She was a scholarship kid, a woman who had built her own successful graphic design firm from the ground up. She was God-fearing, kind-hearted, and loyal to a fault. She was wrapped in love and blind to what a snake's nest she had married into. Everyone had a theory for why Michael chose her. She was a project, a breath of fresh air, a trophy of a different sort. The truth, they thought, was simple. They were in love, a deep, profound, all-consuming love. They built a beautiful life in a sprawling mansion in the hills, a glass and steel testament to modern wealth. There was just one shadow in her perfect picture, one venomous, perfectly coiffed, Chanel-wearing shadow, Evelyn Sterling, Michael's mother, the matriarch of the Sterling Empire. It was a classic child, the evil mother-in-law. From the moment Michael put that 10-carat diamond on Isabella's finger, Evelyn looked at her with a thinly veiled disgust. He had spoiled her plans, you see. Michael was supposed to marry a Prescott or a Vanderbilt, a woman from a family that could merge with theirs. But from Evelyn's perspective, her perfect, brilliant son, her golden child, had married her. The daughter of a postal worker and a school teacher. The audacity. Evelyn's insults were never direct. They were little poison-tipped arrows delivered with a smile. Comments about Isabella's dress, a backhanded compliment on how she'd adjusted so well to wealth, a constant cloying presence in their lives. She was always there, a ghost in their machine. And then there was David. David was Michael's best friend, his shadow. His confidant, always at the house, always on their vacations, always whispering in Michael's ear. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, always dressed in impeccably tailored suits, a smirk permanently etched on his face. Isabella, bless her heart, had tried. She tried to befriend him, to include him, to understand the intense, almost suffocating bond he had with her husband. She chalked it up to a lifelong friendship, a brotherhood. She saw the lingering glances, the touches that lasted a second too long, the inside jokes she was never privy to. She saw it, but she explained it away. She trusted her husband. That was her first mistake. The day her world ended started like any other. A kiss goodbye. As Michael left for a business retreat in the mountains, a promise to call her that night, and I love you. He never called. The next morning, 2 stone-faced police officers were at her door. There had been an accident. His car, it had gone off a winding mountain road, a blind curve, and they said he died instantly. It was a tragedy, a horrible, senseless accident. Isabella collapsed, the kind of grief that hollows you out, that steals the very air from your lungs. The world turned to gray noise. The funeral was a blur of black clothes, pitying faces, and empty condolences. Through it all, Evelyn was a pillar of theatrical grief, clutching a handkerchief to her face, leaning heavily on David's arm. They were a perfect portrait of sorrow. Too perfect. It was in the quiet, lonely weeks that followed that the little splinters of doubt began to work their way under her skin. Little things. Evelyn, who had always been so cold, was suddenly smothering her with concern, bringing her food, tidying the house, all while subtly asking questions about Michael's personal accounts, his passwords, his private safe. It was odd. And David, he was always there, his grief feeling performed. He would talk about how devastated he was, but his eyes were clear, cold. There was no soul-deep ache in him. There was relief. The discovery, when it came, was like a lightning strike. Isabella was packing away some of Michael's things, her hands trembling, her heart aching with every shirt she folded, when a phone she'd never seen before fell out of the pocket of an old gym bag. It wasn't his regular phone. This one was a burner, a ghost. With a shaking finger, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, she turned it on. There was no passcode. It opened right up to a string of text messages, and the world as she knew it ceased to exist. It was all there. Years of it. A whole secret life laid bare in glowing, cruel texts, messages between Michael and David, not of friendship, but of a passionate, secret love affair, explicit photos, declarations of love, plans for secret rendezvous. Isabella stared, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. Her husband, the man who held her every night, was in love with his best friend. The life she thought she had, the love she thought was real, it was all a lie. A carefully constructed cage to hide his truth. The shame and betrayal were so immense, she thought she might actually die from it. She wanted to scream, to break things, to claw at her own skin. But she kept scrolling. She went deeper. And that's when the betrayal turned into pure, unadulterated horror. She found a different thread. A conversation between David and Evelyn, her mother-in-law. The blood in Isabella's veins turned to ice. David, he's getting weak. He's talking about telling her everything. He says he can't live the lie anymore. Evelyn, he will do no such thing. He will not bring that kind of shame on this family. You need to handle him. Remind him what he has to lose. David, I've tried. He's feeling guilty. He actually thinks he loves her. He's threatening to cut me off, to change the will back to the way it was. Evelyn, then we can't let that happen. The retreat is next week. The road is treacherous. Accidents happen all the time. David, are you serious? Evelyn, I'm always serious when it comes to protecting my family's legacy. He has become a liability, a very expensive liability. You know what to do. Make it look clean. and I'll make sure you are both taken care of for the rest of your lives." Isabella dropped the phone as if it had burned her. It clattered to the marble floor, the sound echoing in the cavernous silence of the house. It wasn't an affair. It wasn't a tragic accident. It was murder. They had killed him. Her husband, Evelyn's son. They had cut the brake lines on his car and sent him flying off a mountain to his death. All for money. All to protect a reputation. The grief she had been drowning in evaporated, replaced by a rage so cold and so absolute, it was terrifying. It was a diamond-hard fury that gave her perfect crystal clarity. They thought she was a broken little bird. They had no idea she was a phoenix, and they had just handed her the match. In that moment, a new Isabella was born. The soft, trusting woman died on that marble floor right next to Michael's secret. In her place stood a queen, a general, a woman preparing for war. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She picked up the phone, her hand steady as a surgeon's, and she started making calls. Her first call was to Arthur Covenant, the Sterling family's old lawyer. He was a relic from her father-in-law's era, a man of integrity whom Evelyn had pushed out in favor of her own slick, amoral attorneys. Arthur had always been kind to Isabella, always looked at her with a gentle, knowing eye. "Arthur," she said, her voice low and even. "It's Isabella Sterling. I need to see you, urgently, and I need you to bring a copy of every will and codicil Michael has ever signed." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Isabella, my dear, are you all right? It's very late. The official reading is in a few weeks." "Perhaps you should get some rest." "I am perfectly rested," she replied, an iron core in her voice that surprised even herself. "And I need the truth, Arthur, all of it. Make sure they are certified copies. I have a feeling there's a storm coming, and I intend to be the one holding the lightning." Her next call was more clandestine. It was to a man named Marco, a private investigator she'd been referred to by a friend in the security business. He was discreet, expensive, and ruthlessly efficient. She met him in a dimly lit coffee shop, a ghost of her former self. She laid out the burner phone. She told him everything. She needed him to prove that Michael's brakes were tampered with. She needed him to dig into David's life, into Evelyn's finances, to find every dirty secret they had. "But you can't take it to the police," Marco had said, his brow furrowed. "Not yet," Isabella replied, her eyes like chips of obsidian. I have a plan, a very public plan, and I need the evidence to be irrefutable, a cannonball that will ensure they can't swim away from the wreckage. I am hiring you, Marco, as a consultant to a grieving widow and as a witness to a future crime scene. Just be there to watch. I promise you, it will be worth your while." There was a long silence. Marco was used to dealing with messy divorces, with corporate espionage, but this was different. There must have been something in her eyes, the raw, unyielding promise of a woman on the edge of vengeance, that convinced him. "Tell me where and when," he said finally. For the next 3 weeks, Isabella played the part of the grieving widow to perfection. She let Evelyn and David fuss over her. She allowed them to see her looking pale, lost, and broken. "Oh, darling, I was just calling to see how you are holding up," Evelyn would coo over the phone, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Oh, Evelyn," Isabella would reply, a perfect tremor in her voice. "It's just so hard. I can barely get out of bed in the mornings." "I know, dear, I know," she'd say, a current of satisfaction running just beneath the surface. "I just wanted to let you know Arthur has scheduled the reading of Michael's will for Friday at 2 p.m. I know it's soon, but I think Michael would have wanted us to get it over with, to have that closure." "Oh, that will be difficult, of course," Isabella said, a masterful pause, a hint of a tear in her voice. "Yes, of course, I'll be there. David is planning to come with me, you know, for support. I'm just not strong enough to go through something like that alone." "That's wonderful, dear," Evelyn purred, the sound of a cat who had cornered the canary. "You need to be looked after." Oh, I will be, Isabella thought, a grim smile touching her lips for a fleeting second. You have no idea. The day of the reading arrived. It was a gray, overcast day, the sky weeping apathetic drizzle for a man whose own mother could no longer weep for him. Isabella dressed herself with the precision of a warrior preparing for battle. The Tom Ford dress, a silent armor in a shade of black that absorbed all light and gave nothing back. No jewelry this time. She wanted nothing to distract from her face when their world came crashing down. In her purse, her phone and a small, powerful audio recorder sat like a loaded gun. Next to it was Arthur's secret weapon. She arrived at Arthur Covington's law office, a grand old money building with marble floors and portraits of stern-faced dead men on the walls, exactly on time. She walked into Arthur's private conference room, her head held high, a vision of tragic beauty. He saw something was different, but Isabella's quiet nod, a flicker of shared conspiracy, silenced his questions and steeled his resolve. A few minutes later, the doors to the conference room opened again, and in they walked. Evelyn and David. Girl, let me tell you, the audacity was breathtaking. They didn't look like they were attending a will reading for a man they'd supposedly loved and lost. They looked like they were on their way to a celebratory brunch. Evelyn was swathed in a cream-colored Chanel suit that cost more than a car, a string of pearls gleaming at her throat. Her makeup was immaculate, her smile tight and triumphant. She reeked of expensive perfume and cheap victory. David was by her side, a shark in a bespoke suit, his hand possessively on the small of her back. They were a team, a winning team in a game of their own making. "Isabella!" Evelyn purred, her voice coated with a sickening layer of false sympathy. "So good to see you out of the house. You're looking better." Isabella just gave her a slow, languid nod, her expression unreadable. "Darling," David murmured, stepping toward her, his eyes as cold and dead as a winter pond. They all took their seats at a long, polished table. On one side, Isabella, a solitary island of black. On the other, Evelyn and David, a united front, leaning toward each other like conspirators at the scene of the crime. At the head of the table sat Arthur Covington, a folder of documents laid out in front of him. "Shall we begin?" he asked, his voice echoing in the tense silence. Evelyn and David exchanged a quick, eager glance. This was it. The finish line. The multi-million-dollar prize for a murder well executed. Arthur cleared his throat and began to drone through the legal jargon. He went through the standard bequests, a donation to Michael's alma mater, a trust for a distant cousin, his watch collection to a college friend. Isabella could feel Evelyn's impatience, her foot tapping a staccato rhythm on the plush carpet. "Come on, get to the good part," her posture screamed. Then Arthur got to the main estate. "And now he said, looking up over the rim of his half-moon glasses, "we come to the disposition of the residuary estate of Mr. Michael Sterling, all real property, businesses, and liquid assets of Sterling Pharmaceuticals, currently valued at $52 million. Evelyn sat up straighter, her back rigid, a predatory gleam in her eyes. David put his hand on her arm under the table. This was the moment. Arthur took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the page. Michael Sterling, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate to my beloved mother, Evelyn Sterling." A sharp gasp of performed surprise escaped Evelyn's lips. She brought a hand to her chest, her eyes wide with fake shock. "Oh, Michael," she whispered as if he could hear her. "He left it all to me. My darling boy." David leaned over to hug her in a disgusting display of public theater. They thought they had won. They were in the clear. The money, the power, the freedom, all of it was theirs. Isabella sat there, her face a perfect, unmoving mask, her hands resting calmly on the table in front of her. She let them have their moment. She let them taste the victory they had killed for. Then she cleared her throat, a small, quiet sound. Arthur cleared his throat again, a louder sound this time, a theatrical cough that cut through the room. However, he said, and that one word hung in the air like a guillotine, stopping Evelyn and David cold. Their tableau of triumph and relief froze on their faces. However, Evelyn asked, her voice sharp and brittle. Arthur adjusted his glasses and pulled a separate, older-looking document from the folder, its edges slightly yellowed. However, he repeated, this will is subject to a previously executed, non-revocable codicil, notarized not by Mrs. Sterling's attorneys but by his father's, myself, in the presence of a bank official some years ago. Evelyn's face, which had been flushed with victory, began to pale, turning the color of curdled milk. What? What are you talking about? Michael never filed any codicil. Arthur ignored her, his voice calm and steady as he read from the document. The codicil, Section 4B, states as follows. In the event that my death, Michael Sterling, should be deemed the result of any malicious act or foul play, orchestrated or abetted by any named beneficiary of my estate, they shall forfeit the entirety of their inheritance at the moment of my passing. The will is to be considered null and void, as if it were never made. The color drained completely from Evelyn's face. She looked like she'd been slapped. What? It was an accident. The police said so. This is ridiculous. You can't do this. The codicil grants the executor, in this case me, full authority to make that determination based on any new evidence that may come to light, Arthur said, his gaze fixed on her. And a provision was made for where the estate should be redirected in such an event. And where does it go? David finally chimed in, his voice tight with controlled fury. To his widow? Is that what this is about? Isabella finally spoke, her voice low and dangerously smooth, like velvet wrapped around steel. Oh, no, David, not to me. He was more generous than that. He always looked out for family. Arthur looked back down at the document, his voice ringing with finality. In such an event, the entirety of the estate, a $52 million inheritance, is to be transferred and held in trust in its entirety for... He paused for dramatic effect, letting the tension in the room build until it was thick enough to choke on. To who? Who is it? Evelyn shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation. Arthur looked up, his eyes landing on Isabella for a fraction of a second in a silent signal of support, before he turned his gaze to a far corner of the room. To his son, Mr. James Riley, a product of a relationship from a time prior to his marriage, a son, I might add, that Michael himself never knew he had. Evelyn and David just stared, their mouths hanging open, a symphony of shock and disbelief. A son? It was impossible. It was a lie. The money, their money, the money they had murdered for was gone, vanished into a legal black hole they never even knew existed. Evelyn found her voice a screech of pure, undiluted rage. You can't do this. This is a fabrication. There's no son. There's no new evidence. It was an accident. You have no proof. And that, my sweet niece, is when Isabella played her trump card. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her Tom Ford purse and pulled out a sleek silver flash drive. She placed it on the polished table with a soft, definitive click. And with one fluid motion, she plugged it in, the screen on the wall, which had been dark, flickering to life to reveal a file folder in the center of the screen. As if on cue, the conference room door opened and Detective Miller walked in. He was in a rumpled suit, his face tired and grim. He held in his hand a file folder, Marco's file, Evelyn's financial records, David's phone logs, and the mechanic's report, all signed and sealed. Then his eyes landed on the burner phone on the table. What's this? He asked, his eyes going back and forth between Evelyn and David, a predator sensing a kill. Isabella leaned into the microphone on the table, her voice no longer laced with sorrow, but with the cold, hard clarity of a judge delivering a sentence. That, she said, her voice ringing with the power and righteousness of a woman avenging her dead. "Is my evidence, detective, and he has a confession to hear." The room was as silent and as still as a tomb. Marco didn't even have to get the first file open for David and Evelyn to start cracking, their faces crumbling as he read the report. He described Isabella as she sat there, regal in her revenge black dress, a single tear finally escaping from her eye and tracing a path down her cheek, a tear not of sadness, but of victory. She had won. He had lost. He had tried to play her, a beautiful, unsuspecting pawn who was supposed to legitimize his cover story. He, a master manipulator, a con artist, had been outplayed by the one person he underestimated. He who had preyed on a good woman to keep a secret, to secure a fortune, and she had taken him down. The saying, as they say, is that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. And being scorned in a Tom Ford dress, they found out, is a whole other level of fury and of class. Not loud, not messy, just a cold, clean execution of justice. A masterpiece, a symphony. Don't let them get away with it, Mom. A voice whispered in her head. They can't win. The door to the conference room opened again, and this time it was James. He was a stranger to the opulence of the room, but not to Isabella. He, Marco, and Isabella had met for weeks. He must have been waiting for a signal like this to come through Arthur's office, and he had an escort from the police to protect and assist his entry. James, it turned out, was a good kid. A 24-year-old from a working-class family in Ohio who had no idea who his father was and was working 2 jobs to put himself through night school. A week ago, he was on a bus, a copy of her file in his hand, a photo of her husband, his father. A week ago, he opened a letter, a life-altering letter, a man who happened to be his biological father. He had Michael's eyes and his kind smile. He was smart and driven, and he carried himself with a quiet, humble dignity. This was James, a piece of her husband she'd never known, a legacy her husband got to leave behind. As he walked up the hallway, he gave her a small, grateful smile. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm James." Isabella looked at this young man, this ghost of her husband standing on her doorstep, and for the first time since that horrible day, she felt a flicker of something that she couldn't quite name or understand. It was hope, a strange and fragile kind of hope. The war wasn't over. A battle had been won and lost. A new chapter, and a more complex one, was just beginning. She took her hand, not to shake, but to place it on his arm. "Isabella," she told him, her voice steady. "Please call me Isabella." He had been found. He had come to her, and now she would guide him. And now it was his turn. Her husband's will was, it turned out, the last word. And from the ashes of betrayal, a new legacy was about to be built. And that, girl, is how a grieving widow didn't just get even. She got everything.